And ladies and gentlemen, our next session for the day is Trends in Emerging Tech. The technology sector had been a key focus area for both in the past. Buoyed by India's investment in expanding its digital infrastructure, there had always been a large scope of the two countries to embrace the frontier technologies and collaborate on enhancing capabilities for AI and other new technologies like quantum computing, robotics, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, while efforts in India will be directed towards the development of a proper AL roadmap, the US aims at collaborative opportunities in industry, academia, and other nations, and this includes AI partnership with India. While a major of this has been in defense, with India increasing its procurement of high technology equipment, this alliance can go beyond military. Ladies and gentlemen, with technologies like AI shaping new possibilities in areas like transportation, healthcare, and research, both countries have been presented with new opportunities for partnerships going ahead. The potential gains from cooperation on the competitive talent available in both the countries are many. Various global companies, including those from the US, have established research and product development centers in India. And now, with the exponential growth at which AI and other new technologies are expanding, it will greatly influence the business landscape in the years to come. And both the countries can drive this phenomenon with capacity building of enterprises. Now, such a scenario also throws a vibrant community of startups and collaborative entrepreneurial opportunities on both sides. In addition to the above, there is a huge possibility for India and the US to collaborate on 5G technologies, which would help accelerate development of modern technological solutions. Isn't that amazing? Well, as rightly said by our speaker in the last session, that the relation of India and US, the beauty of it is it's keep moving forward. And now, having said that, we also move forward with this session, and for that, I would like to invite our panelists. But before that, let me tell you that in the interest of time, I will request participants to please view or download all speakers' profile from the lobby. And now, firstly, let me invite the moderator for the session, Ms. Susan Ritchie, Vice President of Trade and Technology Policy, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. And we have our wonderful panelists for this session, Mr. Nitin Rakesh, Chief Executive Officer, Emphasis, Dr. Ruchi Dana, Managing Director, Dana Group, Dubai, and Mr. Suresh Sethi, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, NSDL E-Governance Infrastructure Limited. Mr. Tarpali Rao, CIO, Siebel's Insurance Service, USA. And let me just remind you once again, everyone, that if at all you have any questions, all you need to do is just click on the Ask Question button that you see on the screen, and your question will be directed directly to the moderator. And now, I would request the moderator to please take over this session. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you for that setup. So good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Trends in Emerging Technology panel. Before we get started, I want to express my sincere best wishes to India as it faces today's unparalleled public health challenges. In many ways, our panel today is relevant as we have 4 speakers who have used technology to solve problems, serve customers, and transform lives in various parts of the world. We'll spend the next 40-some minutes hearing from these technologists and innovators who have changed lives in one way or another, how they view the next wave of technological development, and how these emerging technologies will usher in a new era of transformation. We'll hear first from Mr. Nitin Rakesh, a distinguished leader in the technology and financial services industry who has been CEO of Emphasis since 2017. His work advising client companies on their transformation roadmaps with an applied technology focus earned him the Gold Stevie for Executive of the Year Computer Services in 2019, and he was the recipient of the 2019 American Business Awards and International Business Awards Gold Stevie under Tech Innovator of the Year Services category. He is co-author of the book Transformation in Times of Crisis, launched in December 2020 as a practical guide to applying 8 principles for creating opportunity and value through the current COVID crisis. Our next speaker will be Dr. Ruchi Dana, a qualified medical professional and managing director of Dana Group Dubai. Dr. Dana manages the Dana Group's investments in healthcare and digital innovation. She has been recognized by Forbes Middle East as the next generation business leader Arab World for 3 consecutive years from 2017 through 2019, and she was featured on the Forbes Middle East Top Power Business Women's list in 2020. Our third speaker will be Mr. Suresh Sethi, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at NSDL E-Governance Infrastructure Limited, a role he assumed in February 2021. In his previous role, Mr. Sethi was the Additional Secretary, Government of India, and founder, Chief Executive Officer of India Post Payments Bank, where he is credited with creating the largest interoperable banking infrastructure for public good. He also served as CEO and Managing Director of Vodafone M-Pesa Limited, another transformative financial service. Mr. Sethi was named CEO of the Year for his work at India Post Payments Bank at the India Banking Summit and Awards in 2019, and is on the Asian Bankers list of leading practitioners. And rounding out this all-star lineup will be Mr. Rao Tadapalli, CIO at Siebel's Insurance Services and an advisor to Silicon Valley company Plug and Play, as well as a number of startups. Rao's expertise in insurance and financial services, combined with his deep technical knowledge in AI, machine learning, and IoT, make him an industry leader and fintech innovator. So what we'll do is we'll hear for about 5 minutes from each speaker. They'll talk about their view of emerging technology. If you have questions, please post them in the question box. And as time permits, we will pose some questions back to our panelists following this round of opening statements. So with that, let me introduce Mr. Rakesh. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Susan, and good morning, good evening to everybody, and thanks for having me on this panel. I think, as we heard over the last few minutes, and of course in the previous session as well, I think the Indian IT services industry is actually a great example of the collaboration, in the US-India corridor from a technology standpoint. And I think over the last 20, 25 years, this collaboration has actually gone deeper and deeper, with each passing day, not just, because we are servicing US enterprises, but more importantly, I think India has emerged as a major R&D hub for software, for platform development, for all things AI and so on. So I think I'll just spend a few minutes kind of talking a little bit about the context, Susan, that you laid out with this applied tech construct. I think it's so, enamoring to think about what use situation, the major focus and the role that we at Emphasis play as it comes to helping enterprises embrace and adopt tech. If I look at what's going on over the last 8, 9, 10 years, I think with the rapid emergence of all things digital, what that really means is the emergence of smartphones and digital devices that have ushered in this new era of consumerism. I think that the consumer or the end customer is really driving a lot of disruption for every business. And what that really means is that customer expectations have moved rapidly, in favor of, them being serviced anytime, anywhere, pretty much 24/7, and at terms that, that they would like to be serviced on. Think about, a traditional banking, business model come to the branch between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. and everything you need to do can get done in those few hours. Other than that, we can't really service you outside of those hours or on weekends. And here we have now a situation where anytime banking, pretty much all transactions can be done through your smartphone. Now, that's not a trivial change for banks. Similarly, all businesses have had to deal with this massive, rapidly moving, changing customer expectations. So this customer expectation change has driven a massive disruption in the way enterprises run their businesses. And I think the focus, at least from our standpoint, has really been how do you enable these enterprises to keep up in lockstep with these consumers? How do you use data that sits in your own systems? How do you create the power of coming out of that data to improve customer service? And most importantly, how do you then take that feedback loop back into your enterprises and use that knowledge of the customer to drive how do you create new products and services, and how do you target them to these customers? Think about some examples, right? I just talked about banks. Think about companies like Netflix, right? Their primary purpose in being around was they would find a way to match massive libraries of content with each consumer's preferences and really sat in the middle, matching content with consumers, and ended up building a huge trove of data and information to a point that now they can create content with such accuracy that before they put a dollar of investment in the content, they would know how many people are likely to watch it, with what accuracy would they be able to predict that success. Amazon Prime is another great example of how to use data to drive, additional cross-sell, upsell, and most importantly, improve customer service. So I think there are examples after examples. I mean, in the recent last few, months, we've seen rapid deployment and development of vaccines. Massive, great example of how to use data and effectively the ability for use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in crunching that data. Typically, vaccine development used to take years, and the reason was because there was such vast amounts of data that for you to process that data, derive the efficacy, derive the safety, and then take that feedback into the next iteration would take years. In this case, because there was pretty much real-time processing of data using artificial intelligence, we've seen that timeline being crunched by 80-90%. So I think those are some real-life examples of where we've seen all of this play out. Most enterprises continue to I would say lag behind customer expectations. I think the era of every business is a technology business is right here upon us. Again, if you look at something like an electric vehicle, it's really not a car; it's a computer on wheels, and there is more processing power in there than the rocket that went to the moon in 1969. So I think that's the pace of change that we have seen in technology. That's the power that consumers have in their palms right now. And most enterprises, have to find a way to harness the technology, really get to know their customer, well, to a point that they can predict their needs, create products and services that can be highly customized, and most importantly, the loyalty of the customers that is moving away from brands to experiences will continue to drive this massive disruption away. For every Walmart that has actually very successfully adopted and embraced technology and stood up against competitive forces from the likes of Amazon, I think there are many other examples in the retail industry that haven't been able to do it, and I've seen massive disruption in that industry as well. So I think that's kind of my perspective and focus on, how do you use technology and the power that technology gives you. Away again, we a little bit away from just the buzzwords, but how do you really apply the technology in your real life business? And that's kind of been the focus. And that the book you reference to was really a practical guide of how do you use some of these capabilities that are available and apply them to your existing businesses to make that that pivot around the digital demands from customers. Back to you, Susan. Thank you.
No, thank you for those comments, and particularly for your focus on the customer. Over to Dr. Dana to talk about some innovations that she is been witness to in the healthcare industry. Please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Susan, for the introduction, and I'm really glad to be here. So I'm a medical doctor, so I'll speak mainly about the healthcare industry, but I'm not a virus expert, I'm not a vaccine expert, as like a lot of people are becoming these days. So I won't speak about that aspect. I'll mainly speak about the emerging technologies and how they have been helping in terms of COVID and like what the future of healthcare would look like. So when we came across the COVID situation, there was also a geopolitical situation happening with China and all, and that was one of the reasons that a lot of supply chain was trying to get shifted from China to other parts of the world, and India was very nicely positioned to take advantage of that situation. So I think like in that aspect, like even if we talk about vaccines or like the injections, the needles, the syringes, I think India is very well positioned to take advantage of that. And we have seen a lot of cases of open innovation in which a number of corporates have come up with problem statements, and a number of startups and individuals have been working on creative solutions, and corporates have even come together, and even competitors have come together, join hands, and like make it a single vision to save lives. So I think like what we are seeing, what we saw in the past year and this year again is an example of how open innovation can work and can help save lives in real time. One of the other things that actually caught on a lot was telehealth. So telehealth has been around for a number of years, but the adoption of telehealth had been significantly increased because of COVID times. But along with that, there was like some issues that personally, like people on the floor, like people who use telehealth would be aware of. So one of that was that if you look at chains of hospitals, like they don't just rely on doctors, they also have other cost centers and other revenue centers. Like they would have a laboratory with them, they would have a cafeteria. So if a patient would walk down in a hospital, he would like the doctor would order some lab results, and would the patient would maybe buy a coffee, sit down in the cafeteria, and all of those things. So that is one of the things that why telehealth was not being adopted earlier, but because of COVID-19, telehealth has been increasingly adopted. But again, like as we saw, like things returning to normal, hospitals are sort of wanting to go back to the old model because it really affects their entire revenue centers, like the labs, the pharmacies, the cafeterias that these hospitals have within themselves. So I think like there would be like some sort of model in which we can take care of all the stakeholders involved. That would be a good way to think about it. And as we went into telehealth, there was also a lot of focus on cybersecurity. So in fact, there was a hospital in the US in which like the hospital had to pay the ransom to get the data back from like the hacker. So that was a case which brought a lot of attention to the problem of cybersecurity, and especially in healthcare, because as we moved into like more and more tech and advanced ways of like there was a lot of focus on remote patient monitoring. And I think with the help of wearables, remote patient monitoring would be around for a long period of time, if for taking care of elderly people or people in nursing homes and all, in which like you don't have to go to the doctor, and you don't have to get your vitals checked with the doctor. Instead of that, your vitals can be continuously monitored with the help of wearable devices. And one of the innovative things that we saw in remote patient monitoring was there was a focus on outcome based approaches. So that's really good, because if you focus on outcome, then it's actually very beneficial to the entire healthcare system, and it would bring about a huge cost saving to the entire system. But again, like even in terms of remote patient monitoring, cybersecurity seemed to be like one of the challenges that was there. And there are a number of cybersecurity startups that are working to like make the entire system much more robust. Apart from that, like I saw a number of startups working on workflow automation for healthcare, because like the hospitals were so burdened with so many things at the same point of time, like patient flow and all of those things. So if you have like some sort of triaging and some sort of workflow optimization, that would actually help in optimizing the resources of the hospital in a much better way. So for that, one of the things that was initially it was closed down, but the elective surgeries were not there. But like eventually, when the elective surgeries began again, robotic surgery saw a huge spike, because what happens in robotic surgery is that you can actually save up the resources of the hospital. You don't need as many nurses in the operation theater. You can actually make surgeries a daycare surgery, so you can minimize the use of hospital beds. You can minimize the use of resources in terms of pain management, and it becomes like a daycare surgery. So you can like almost all of the stakeholders except for pharma industry were taken care of. So that was a huge trend. And I've seen a number of startups working on the concept of robotic surgery and using like AI and computer navigation to diagnose a number of things. Like teleradiology has been around for a long period of time, but now there's a use of AI to actually triage patients in such a way that you can optimize the use of doctors for teleradiology. And if we talk about the trend of AI and in overall in biotech, we can see a lot of focus on the use of AI for drug discovery. And apart from that, there were also like some companies that were working on the use of AI to actually find biomarkers for diseases that had like rare diseases or diseases for which there were only a couple of biomarkers existing. So I think that's a new way to think about it, because computational biology has really taken things to the next level, and people can actually have like high throughput screenings in which you can screen a number of rare diseases at the same point of time. You can screen a number of molecules, number of drugs at the same point of time, and that actually helps quite a lot. So there was a lot of funding that went to this aspect. And if you talk about use of AI in precision medicine and personalized medicine, one of the main challenge that we have been seeing over that like it becomes very, very expensive to think about like how to actually bring down the cost of these things. The best way to go about it would be to have like huge manufacturing facilities, and for that again India is very well positioned. In fact, I saw a couple of projects in which like they were thinking of putting up like cold storage and clean rooms manufacturing facilities in India, so that we can bring this entire concept of precision medicine and personalized medicine to scale, and that's one of the ways to minimize the cost for these operations. So that was mainly the trends that we saw. And apart from that, there were a number of startups working on just COVID specific problems. So we as a family office, we didn't really pay much attention to those startups, because we invest in companies in which like there's a long term sustainable source of revenue and stuff. So but some of these startups that came across just because of COVID, they also have applications for other diseases. So such platform technologies would have a huge use case in the near future. And as we saw, there was a number of exits that happened in the healthcare field, and a lot of exits happened to SPACs. So that again has made the entire healthcare sector very, very interesting for investors as well as founders. And I think like till Feb this year itself, we had more than $20 billion of exits that happened through SPACs. So that becomes a very attractive sector. One of the last points that I would like to show is that women were disproportionately affected because of COVID-19. And specifically, if we talk about like the healthcare workers, the nurses, the doctors that were female, that were disproportionately affected. And one of the reasons for that was that there was a UN report that came across that even the masks that are there, they're not suitable for women, like they're not suitable for women. So just paying attention to this factor, and maybe like bringing to light the factor that like having more women on boards would be one of the ways to like bring about that sort of representation and that sort of problems to the light of the main manufacturers of various stuffs, because you need that kind of representation that's there out in the market. You need the same sort of representation on the boards as well. So I just leave the panel with this thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was very insightful. I love your point about women and PPE fits. Mr. Sethi, I think you've got some interesting comments about financial services and payments. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. A pleasure to be on the panel, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. I will pick up from where Nitin mentioned earlier in terms of financial services, because I think a large part of my work has been earlier dedicated towards ensuring inclusion across a wide spectrum of people. And I think today, as we all are in the midst of a pandemic, one of the clear challenges remain that while digitization has taken a very central role, how do we ensure that rather than introducing equality, it doesn't lead to inequality because of different abilities or different sort of capabilities at the last mile. The organization I'm working with currently has been a pioneer in implementing e-governance infrastructure for the nation, working both with the central and state governments. We've been playing a significant role in modernizing the tax systems of the country, looking at the old age pension and security systems. But today I would like to talk about a program in which we were involved right at the outset, which was about getting the National ID program for India rolled across the country. And we played a significant role at that period in enrolling citizens for getting a biometric identity. And today we clearly see the results of that, that as we look at people who were otherwise on the fringes of inclusion, financial inclusion, have now become part of the ecosystem. It is pertinent to mention that there's a report by BIS which says that what India has been able to achieve in terms of financial inclusion in a matter of 10 years would have otherwise taken a cycle of 46 years to achieve. So our people having bank account in a matter of 10 years has moved from somewhere around 20% to 90%. So everybody today out there, adult population wise, has a bank account. And that has become very relevant in today's scenario. So when we looked at banks, their ability to reach the last mile, to do the KYC and onboard customers was seriously hampered because neither did they have the infrastructure nor the ability to reach out in a sustainable fashion to bring people into an inclusive ecosystem. The introduction of a biometric identity across the population made it easier to enable people to come into the financial ecosystem. Further to that, what became equally important was providing access to people. Now, while you may have a bank account, how do you operate the account? How do you reach out and access those services? And that is where our payment and settlement systems have played a singular role in enabling people to be able to operate their account. Now, when we put these two together, now whether it is peer-to-peer money movement or it is in today's scenario, the ability of the government to respond to a shock like a pandemic, where today we know that a significant workforce out there in India is working in the unorganized or the informal sector. The government today has the ability to provide last mile benefits or subsidies where they can use this entire ecosystem of accounts and Aadhaar and provide money at the last mile. Some of the astounding numbers as we see that in terms of reaction to the pandemic, the government has been able to reach last mile subsidy direct into the bank accounts of people. And during the year 2020-21, during the course of the pandemic, almost $60 billion of subsidy has been pumped into accounts of the people as direct benefit subsidy. And more pertinent to mention, which I would like to talk about from a India Post perspective of what we did over there leveraging these systems, was to provide the last mile access. It has been the largest exercise anywhere in the world where we were able to get 250,000 postal workers enabled with a simple smartphone and a biometric device where they could offer banking services at your doorstep. So anybody today who has an Aadhaar-based account can actually provide their fingerprint, access their account at their home through a postal worker and be able to withdraw cash. So during this period when we were able to send money to the accounts of the people, the postal workers have effectively transferred cash to people at their home to the tune of almost $1 billion. So these are some of the interventions which have played a big role in one, enabling people to tide over this crisis. Secondly, when we look at as we move away from the person-to-person transactions and we look at the MSME sector, which becomes the bulwark for any sort of financial economic upturn as we look at it, it becomes equally important that these people have the ability to sell their goods, to showcase their goods. Now for every Amazon, every e-commerce system player out there, it is equally important that the unorganized or the self-organized retail also gets an equal opportunity to participate in the e-commerce ecosystem. And some of these systems, as we look at creating open architecture system of connecting people to consumers, have become more and more relevant in this today's market for people to get this access. So I think these are some of the areas in financial inclusion which have played a very strong role. And I think the underlying theme which becomes very important is to provide universal access, remove information asymmetry so that people can get access both to credit and be able to be part of the supply chain in a formal digital manner. And these have been the underlying features which have become very important at this point of time. So I will stop at this stage and pass it back to you, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. So last but not least is our resident technologist coming to us from LA. Over to you, Rao.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for being the moderator, and thank you for all my fellow speakers. Appreciate joining. And also thank you for the organizers for the opportunity to be on the panel. And, basically what I want to say is that I want to start off with a quote from a famous philosopher, Charles Darwin. What the quote says is, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that's most adaptable to change. And this quote is so relevant in today as most of us are going through the pandemic. So we can talk about all these emerging technologies and everything, but really about our ability to adapt to the changes that we are basically facing today, whether it's through pandemic or any other external events that make us not the status quo. We just need to move forward. So, and before I talk about the trends and the emerging technologies, one of the things, me spending quite a few years in the Silicon Valley with a lot of startups, innovation is an important aspect of dealing with emerging technologies. And in the previous panels, I heard the word creativity. Creativity is such an important factor, not just in technology, creativity in establishing bilateral partnerships with India, USA, and other countries. So we need to be creative. Actually, the time in the current pandemic times we have, we need to be creative. And just mention how much importance creativity plays is a recent IBM poll identified creativity as the number one leadership competence of the future. That doesn't mean that other competencies are not important, but creativity is placed first. So we all have to be creative, not only in adopting these new emerging technologies, but also be creative in how we can get things done. How can we cut out some of the bureaucracy, so to speak, and get things moving at a faster speed? So that's what we kind of need to adopt. And innovation is the lifeblood of the global economy and a strategic priority for almost most of the countries around the world. So innovation plays a role. And also, sometimes I ask the question, sometimes people ask me the question, what does it take to innovate? Obviously, innovation needs a different mindset. When I talk about the mindset, first of all, I kind of put it as two types of mindset: growth mindset, fixed mindset. So people need to have the growth mindset, which are willing to learn. And also there are two type of categories of people. One is fear of failure, and the other one is fear of missing out on the opportunity. So in order to cultivate innovation, we have to kind of not worry too much about the failure, but we need to kind of jump in and remove the stigma of failure and really kind of be able to experiment. So some of the characteristics of key innovators are observing. They observe not only from their own industry, but from other industries and borrow some best practices from those industries. And the other important one is questioning. We need to develop the ability to ask the questions, not take the status quo for granted. We got to question, why can't we do this way? How about this? How about that? And then associating. We need to be associate something we have done in the past with the present, and how can we kind of move forward and apply those kind of things in the future. And then networking. Networking is an extremely important thing, not only within the industry, but outside the industry. I'm here in Los Angeles, even though I'm in the tech, I have a lot of friends in Hollywood, and we try to borrow some of the things that Hollywood does effectively and adopt that in technology. So we need to network to find out what other industries are doing so we can basically adopt those kind of things. And finally, experimentation, that we need to experiment with the emerging technologies and see what we can do. So now coming to some of the key emerging technologies, I have been involved in. The top is IoT. I know Dr. Dana mentioned about wearables. Most of the wearables fall under the category of IoTs. IoT allows measurement, and measurement allows metrics. So the whole industry can be kind of changed once we get basically metrics in place. And the blockchain is another emerging technology. AI, many people talked about. And omni-channel, I know that's what Mr. Nitin mentioned about, is ability to do things anytime, anywhere, any device, and be able to pick up from any device and all. But one question is, okay, we have all these emerging technologies, big data, voice, Alexa. How do we basically adopt these things? So the first is you have to find out a gap in the industry. Is there a gap? Can any of these technologies address the gap? May not be one technology, but the combination of these technologies, speed to market, cost reduction, does it improve operational efficiency and customer expectations? Today, the customer expectations are the highest. Everybody wants the service to be like Amazon to be able to do that. So it doesn't matter whether we're a bank or insurance company, the user expectations are extremely high. So these are some of the things that need to be done. So also focus on the application of these technologies, not on the theoretical research. Let the educational institutions worry about the theoretical research, but the industry need to be focusing on the application of these technologies and bridge the education institutions and industry. We need to do something about, closing the gap about this thing. And one of the things is that when we are adopting these technologies, the way we can accomplish the success of adopting this technology is, I call this as two ECs. EC stands for economic connection, and the other EC stands for emotional connection. You need to connect with both economics and emotional. That's how we can take advantage of those things and all. I will just talk about one quickly, blockchain. Blockchain is one of the things that really kind of taking over at least the financial services industry and few others. Smart contracts. Blockchain is decentralized and it's indelible. That means it's permanent. So smart contracts will bring some of these. It liberates us from the static. And Google came to fame by organizing things. Facebook came to fame by connecting. Blockchain is connection and organizer. So imagine the power of, basically, I'm not saying it could be combination of Google and Facebook, but that's what the blockchain is capable of. And finally, the big data. The data is the new currency in the digital world, and its credit limit is the trust. Credit line is the trust. So it's the entire value, that data, we have to make sure it's accurate, all those things. And one of my favorite application of artificial intelligence and IoT and all is smart homes. So anything to enhance the senior citizen living, there is a great need with so many people retiring in both countries. So I believe we have a social responsibility to basically help the senior citizens by using the technology, whether it's smart home or not. And finally, I want to end it by saying technology is a double-edged sword. Just like Newton's third law, for every action, there's an equivalent and opposite reaction. That's where I know Dr. Dana mentioned that cybersecurity. So with all the things, cybersecurity comes into play. So we need to be basically making sure how we can mitigate some of these cyber attacks and things like that. And with all the things happening technology, I will complete it with the quote from one of the authors, Thomas Friedman. Geography is history. That means there is no boundaries for enabling the global economy. And just let's make this Indo-US partnership as a bridge for connecting the rest of the world. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. So we have 4 minutes left, and I'm going to pose a question to all of our panelists. Thinking for a minute about emerging technology, would you say the pandemic has accelerated the development or the deployment of of a particular emerging technology or emerging technologies? Or many of you, or most of you, I think, really talked about applications and applications that used existing technologies. So if you were to think about what's been the transformative aspect, would it be that there was a particular emerging technology that whose development and deployment was accelerated? Or would you say that there has been applications adopted that will result in long-term change? So let's start with, I'm going to put Mr. Rakesh on the spot.
No problem, Susan. I think it's a great question. I think for the most part, the crisis has been a major accelerant. I don't think there's been any new trend that we hadn't kind of seen going into the crisis that hasn't been accelerated by at least an order of magnitude, maybe. And I think Mr. Sethi referred to the progress that we made, in inclusion in India over, 10 years would have been 47 years. I'll just give you some data points. The adoption of e-commerce, the adoption of telehealth, all of the progress we made in the last 1 year would have actually taken anywhere between 10 and 20 years. So I think there is a major acceleration of almost all technologies that we talked about, from AI to blockchain to data to IoT to, of course, cybersecurity, both in a good way and not such a good way. So I think there isn't any one technology that stands out, but I would say across the board, there's been a major acceleration. Most importantly, though, I think a number of use cases, the number of applications has exploded as well. So it's not just same application of same technology. I think it's the newer areas. And I think we talked to, Mr. Rao talked a little bit about looking at other industries to learn. I actually think, the geographies of industries are also history. There is no way to predict competition coming in from within the industry or outside the industry. In fact, it's more from the outside of the industry today than from within the industry. And I think that trend has also been accelerated in the last 1 year or so.
Yeah, interesting. Ruchi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would love to say, like, I would agree with Mr. Nitin's point here about the adoption of technologies. It has accelerated quite a lot. In fact, it's also because of the mentality of people. So recently, I was on an all doctors panel, and all the doctors were saying that suddenly all the patients that we talk to are so much more adherent to the medications that we give, right? Because everybody is now thinking about how to boost their immunity and how to take care of preventive healthcare. So I think having technology to help in terms of making people be disease free, not even go to the disease stage, but just prevent diseases. I think that would be one great application of the technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Sethi, we have about 15 seconds.
Yes, absolutely agree. There's been a great acceleration in adoption of technology. Only point I would like to add over there, I think Mr. Rao mentioned about innovation. I think a lot of it is also now about frugal innovation to take it to people who cannot afford technology and how we can bring them into the ecosystem. That has been another important area. And as we talk about data, we are talking about enabling lending for people who never had ever credit history before. So moving away from balance sheet lending to flow-based lending has been a very big thrust, and data becoming a instrument for enabling people to get access to credit is an important area we see in the financial services. But I will pass it on since we have limited time, so thank you very much.
And we will give Mr. Rao the last word as we wrap up for today.
Well, thank you. I think I agree with everyone here on this adoption. It's accelerated very quickly. There are two areas I have seen even more accelerated adoption in the financial services industry is the digital payments. Check printing is almost becoming history because people are not allowed to come into the office, so everything has become digital. That has accelerated very, very quickly. The second one is the drones. The drones have helped really kind of estimating the property damage, whether it's hurricanes and floods or whatever it is. So those are two areas among many others that really kind of accelerated. The pandemic has accelerated anything that involves human beings need to go instead of that, the machines, whether it's robotics or drones or whatever it is. So that is the area that I have seen extremely accelerated progress.
Thank you. So it looks like the word for this panel is acceleration. And with that, let me thank our four panelists for your great insights and your observations. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.